Boy, what a beautiful day it is here in Las Vegas.
It's the last known video of O.J. Simpson's 9 weeks before his death from cancer, and typically it was filled with falsehoods.
Orenthal James Simpson died on the 10th of April 2024. If you are born in the 21st century like me, you probably only associate O.J. Simpson with his murder trial. Most of our generation don't have the full context of the weight that this trial had on American culture. What I want to get into today, however, is significantly less discussed, and that is his time after prison. O.J. was granted early release in 2017, was discharged in 2021, and then died in 2024. During this brief period, he was pretty prolific on social media. He'd been incarcerated since 2008, so when they finally let him go, he essentially returned to a completely different country. The cultural perception of him during his incarceration shifted quite a bit as well. When he went away, his acquittal was still quite contentious, whereas now the vast majority of Americans, especially younger ones, think he's guilty. This is why I think it's worth looking into this last period of his life. How had he changed? How was he dealing with the new world he walked into? Did he ever give anything even close to a real confession? You know, other than the many different times he had basically already done so. But before we get into that, let me give you a rundown on O.J. Simpson's life up until prison. Even if you're already familiar with his story, I would recommend not skipping this. Aside from the fact that I did actually put some effort into writing this part, I also want to highlight some themes throughout his pre-prison life that I'm also going to emphasize when talking about his post-prison life. This is also why I'm not going to tell this part chronologically, but split it up between the three sides of O.J. Simpson: the superstar, the African American, and the criminal. So without further ado, the story of O.J. O.J. Simpson was an incredibly talented running back, something which was recognized in high school and especially in college. Enrolling in USC in Los Angeles in 1967, he was making waves in the sports world early on by a 64-yard touchdown run, which won the game against UCLA the same year. After college, he was drafted by the Buffalo Bills, where he was the first person to run 2,000 yards in a season in football history in 1972, something which has only been repeated by 8 others as of 2025. This was at a time where seasons were still 14 games rather than the modern 16, so when you restricted to 14, Simpson hasn't actually been beaten yet. During his time in college, he also started acting, getting his first role in Dragnet as an LAPD recruiter in 1968. During the 1970s, he made appearances in films like The Klansman and The Towering Inferno, and in the TV series Roots. He also hosted an episode of SNL in the 3rd season. After playing for his home team, the San Francisco 49ers, for a year and a half, he retired from football to focus on his acting career. In 1984, he was considered by James Cameron to play the role of the Terminator, who was later rejected because he felt that O.J. was too nice to be considered a killer. In the late 80s and early 90s, he would play Detective Nordberg in the Naked Gun movies, and he also made an exercise tape.
Long, as I said, we're not working up a sweat here. We're just trying to get that blood flowing, okay?
Then some stuff happened. He did a hidden cam prank show in the 2000s called Juiced, made some rap music, and did some interviews.
After we finished filming, O.J. said to me that he had a surprise for me, and I genuinely was surprised. I think it was his idea of a joke, and this is it.
Then some more stuff happened. Now before I start this segment, an important disclaimer. Contrary to what you might assume, I am not black. So when I'm going to be talking about the racial politics of late 20th century Black America, there's a good chance that I might miss out on some nuances. Nonetheless, I'll be covering this to the best of my abilities, since it's integral to O.J. Simpson as a person. O.J. Simpson grew up in the projects of San Francisco, being primarily surrounded by other black people. This essentially stayed this way up until college, during which his talents started to become widely recognized. This resulted in him being approached by prestigious colleges like USC. USC was a big glamorous Hollywood college in the 1960s, which meant 3 things. 1, basically everyone there was white. 2, most people there were rich and connected, with many being trust fund kids, which resulted in 3, there was, relatively speaking, very little political activity there. The college campuses of the late 60s were almost exclusively associated with protest culture, whether it be civil rights sit-ins, anti-Vietnam protests, women's marches, militant left-wing student committees, and so on. USC was a habitat for the wealthy and powerful, meaning that they were significantly less likely to get drafted, and many of them likely approved of the status quo. You might suspect that OJ, a black man from a humble background, would be alienated here, but the reality was quite the opposite. OJ was very popular at USC. A good portion of that can be attributed to his ability as a running back, but the fact that he was black was probably also a considerable factor in his popularity. It was a novelty. This was very shortly after desegregation, so many people there had probably never seen a black person before outside of the news or in passing. This is the first one they knew personally, and the fact that OJ never really brought up his race probably made things go a bit smoother. As time went on, and he spent increasingly more time with rich white people, he was being increasingly perceived by them as one of them, until eventually he himself was starting to perceive himself that way. When he moved into his acting career, he was able to fill a role that white America was desperately wanting to fill, one of the non-controversial, non-political African American. The role of the counter-revolutionary. He wasn't on TV denouncing the Black Panthers or anti-war protesters, but he was playing into the pick yourself up by your bootstraps narrative that predicated itself on the pretense of meritocracy. There's a good chance that he never actually thought about his perception this deeply, as much of his distancing from other black people seems to have been done as a form of self-preservation. Beyond that, however, he seems to have enjoyed the fact that he was perceived as different to other black people.
I'm not black, I'm OJ. Okay.
The reason why I needed to talk about O.J. Simpson as an African American is because it, together with his aforementioned fame, synthesizes into the apotheosis of O.J. Simpson's career, the trial of the century. Again, I'm only going to give a summary here, since it's pretty complicated and not the main subject of the video. O.J. married Nicole Brown in 1985 and had 2 kids with her. Throughout this marriage, O.J. was constantly cheating on her with other women he would meet, often spending long periods of time away from their house in Brentwood. When he was home, he was often abusive, both verbally and physically. The police had to get involved in 8 of these bouts of domestic violence. Brown filed for divorce in 1992, but about a year afterwards, they were trying to reconcile. They permanently split up in 1994. During the domestic violence bouts and during their reconciliation, Brown told multiple people, including police officers, that O.J. was going to kill her. On June 13th, 1994, Brown and her friend, Ron Goldman, were both found murdered at her house. After a short police chase, they got O.J. at his house and arrested him. Tons of people from around LA, most of them black, came to support O.J. What followed was the longest trial in California history, lasting 9 months, meaning that if they impregnated O.J. at the beginning of the trial, he would have given birth by the end of it. He was defended by what would later be known as the Dream Team, which included civil rights lawyer Johnny Cochran, Kim Kardashian's dad before he became a Force ghost, and Alan Dershowitz, who later ended up defending upstanding citizens like Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, and Trump in his first impeachment trial. What a guy, well liked by men, women, and even kids. Now, to give some context to the era in which this trial was held, the early 90s were a time of strong racial tensions in Los Angeles due to militant police brutality by the LAPD, with specific emphasis on the assault on Rodney King, which ended in acquittal for all those involved. On top of this, you also had the lack of jail time for Soon Ja-do, a Korean-American convenience store owner who shot a 15-year-old Latasha Harlins to death because she suspected that she might steal something. This resulted in the LA riots of '92, which are beyond the scope of this video, but the relevance of this case was in the fact that trust in police was at an all-time low, with black Los Angelesians, Angelino, whatever. The precarious race relations were probably the reason why they treated O.J. like a small dog in front of a highway when they went to arrest him. I mean, O.J. was also famous and well liked by Brentwood police, but they really wanted an optical win. So O.J. went to trial and it was a whole thing. The cop that linked him to the murder turned out to be John Racist, patron saint of the hard R's. The forensics team touched every piece of evidence without gloves. Speaking of gloves, the one linking him to the murder didn't fit around his gross swollen arthritis hands. And if the glove don't fit, he must have quit, and also Hitler for some reason.
One of the worst people in the history of this world, Adolf Hitler.
They also used the exercise tape from earlier as evidence.
Get some of that tension out of your neck, alright?
While this was happening, black rights groups were supporting O.J., and free O.J. chants were heard around Los Angeles. Around 70% of black Americans thought he was innocent, compared to around 70% of white Americans who thought the opposite. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't me blaming OJ's release on black people. This isn't that kind of channel.
Why are people black? Like why is their skin like that?
The moon.
Yeah, okay.
But it would be remiss of me not to mention this element of it. OJ's acquittal was probably the result of a mix of a couple of different things. The incompetence of the prosecution, the forensic fuck-ups, the racial tensions, and the ungodly amount of money that OJ was spending on his small army of lawyers. Either way, he got off, and he was able to live an incredibly strange career afterwards. Given the fact that he was rejected by white America now, he started connecting more with black America.
I'm not OJ, I'm black. Heck what?
He started going to activist gatherings, like churches. He started eating chicken and waffle, which, if nothing else, that should have kinda tipped off how long he had exclusively spent time with white people. That he was like, I want to be more black, I need to eat fried chicken.
I'm not OJ,
He also wrote a book about the fact that he didn't commit the murders, but if he had committed the murders, how he would have done it and why. If you've ever wondered what a pre-internet shitpost would actually look like, this is probably the closest you can get. Usually when a celebrity starts falling off, they either go to Florida or Vegas. OJ ended up doing both, doing a double murder on his career as well. During this period of his life, he started getting connected to a few gang members who respected him from getting away with murder. He also started to become a bloated embarrassment, similar to Elvis's Vegas periods. And just like with Elvis, his Vegas era would end in shit. One of OJ's contacts told him that some guy was selling his stolen goods, but it was just memorabilia. And when they met up in a Vegas hotel, OJ ended up doing an armed robbery and kidnapping with his buddies. He landed himself 33 years in jail. His subsequent time in prison went by relatively uneventfully, with the exception of the time he stole a bunch of oatmeal cookies. OJ got parole and was let out of jail on October 1st, 2017. The juice was loose. 2 years after this, he made his Twitter account, The Real OJ32. He made his first post shortly after.
Hey Twitter world, this is yours truly. Now coming soon to Twitter, you'll get to read all my thoughts and opinions on just about everything. Now there's a lot of fake OJ accounts out there, so this one, at The Real OJ32, is the only official one. So this should be a lot of fun. I got a little getting even to do. So God bless, take care.
He gained a pretty substantial following after he joined, currently standing at 843,000 followers. And this is after he died, mind you, so I imagine it was quite a bit higher at first.
Hey Twitter world, you know, for years people have been able to say whatever they want to say about me with no accountability. But now I get to challenge a lot of that BS and set the record straight. More importantly, I'll be able to talk about everything, especially sports, fantasy football, and even politics.
Most of his posts online are in relation to sports, especially current football, and specifically Antonio Brown, who he mentions a lot. Sometimes about golf, and in a lot of cases about fantasy football.
Well, what you're looking at is our league's Super Bowl belt, and guess who's got the championship belt? Yours truly, at home in my jammies. Oh.
It's a strange thing watching these videos. Even if you're one of the few that still somehow thinks that he's innocent, he still exploited the murder of his wife for profit and did the robbery in 2007. He's a shitty dude, but watching these, it's pretty easy to forget that. The videos where he talks about fantasy football are genuinely charming. Even later on when he talks about politics, it's done in such a moderate and weirdly paternal way that it just feels like you're listening to your dad or something. I'm far from the first person to pick up on this aspect of OJ. Celia Farber, who worked on a report about OJ's post-trial life, once referred to this as the OJ effect. OJ's charisma is able to let you forget about the reality of what he's done. Most people want to believe, even at some subconscious level, that other people are good, and that when we do encounter bad people, we're able to recognize the fact without ambiguity. With OJ, it's difficult not to like the guy, so it can be easy to fall into the trap of wanting him to be innocent. Since most of his posts are about sports in one way or another, I'm primarily going to be focusing on stuff that isn't that. His first major deviation from sports is when he talks about the 10-year anniversary of Michael Jackson's death.
Hey Twitter world, you know, I woke up this morning, they were talking about Michael Jackson's 10th anniversary of his death. I was playing tennis in my backyard with a neighbor when he got word that his nephew was sent home from summer camp because they found out he had cancer, and I guess it had something to do with insurance, and they couldn't have him at the camp. He got a little upset and said, geez, we gotta do something about this. So he came up with the idea. He called some of his friends, he was a celebrity, he called some of his friends I called Michael, he was real hot there, to see if he would help. And we got together to help in the beginning of Camp Good Times, a camp for kids with cancer. Anyway, years later, my house was under siege by the media, and I had somehow got out. And I was staying at Don Omeyer's house, and I was getting my kids on the weekends, and they would come up. Don had a great house, the late Don Omeyer, I should say. They had a great house, but it was restrictive. Michael found out, he called me and said, OJ, you got to take the kids up to Neverland Ranch. They love it. And it was wondrous. My point is, I could never debate anybody about Michael Jackson. I didn't know enough about his private life to do that.
I tried looking more into the relationship between Michael Jackson and OJ, but it seems that the two anecdotes he relays here are basically the full extent of it. Other than that, the only remarkable thing about this is that when you look up O.J. Simpson Michael Jackson, the first result is, did O.J. Simpson kill Michael Jackson?
Hello, Twitter world. It's me, yours truly. Well, the day is 9/11, and I guess we all should take a moment to remember the people who gave their lives and lost their lives on that day. A horrible day, but something I'd never forget. I woke up this morning thinking that that would be the first thing I hear, but my TV is automatically on a sports station, and then, of course, they're talking about Antonio Brown and the rape allegations, and I'm listening to these sportscasters. All of a sudden, they become crime reporters. And I heard this one guy make an idiotic statement that the girl is obviously moral and all that, and she might be. I'm not saying she's not. But they said because she's only asking for $75,000. And I'm saying to myself, Jesus, why don't these sports guys just talk about sports? The law is in federal court that she has to ask for a minimum of $75,000. Make no mistake about it. This girl ain't sending herself through all of this for $75,000. So stick to what you know. Don't talk about what you don't know. I'm just saying. Take care.
Just in case you were confused, I think he meant to say immoral in the first parts, which made the rest of it kinda difficult to follow. The sports commentators are essentially saying that the woman is making accusations for the money, and O.J. Simpson, being the great defender of women that he is, says that they should stick to sports. The woman in question was Brittany Taylor, Antonio Brown's former trainer. After she made her accusations, another woman stepped forward with similar accusations, both of which would end up being settled outside of courts. Even though OJ is defending the girl here, he never really mentions this case again after this and doesn't change his approach to Antonio Brown at all. I'm not sure how consequential this really was. In 2020 the pandemic started, and it finally took the thing that OJ loved the most, golf.
Hey, Twitter world, yours truly. Well, we got to finish our round of golf today. They said they were going to close the golf course at one point. And if you do close them, you better open up some insane asylum. Get me a bed, because I know if I can't play golf for the next month, I'm going to go crazy.
Speaking of COVID, remember when at the beginning of the pandemic, people stopped buying Chinese food?
Well, I recently just saw a story that sort of kind of depressed me. It was about people are not going to Chinese restaurants, and here in Las Vegas, a few of them are in danger of going out. I know in my neighborhood there's a number of them, but order food to go. These are American people.
During this time, he engaged in some classic 2020 activities like watching Tiger King.
Listen, I've had so many people on my case asking me to watch some show called Tiger King. I watched about 6 episodes of this show and I couldn't even believe what I was looking at. White people! What's with you and wild animals? Leave them animals alone. One thing I will say, there's not a shred of doubt in my mind that that lady's husband is Tiger Sashimi right now.
Anyway, shortly after this, the election cycle was starting and the Jews had some things to say.
Things going on. We got Thursday night football, and we have the Democratic debates, and they're getting down to the nitty gritty. You know, I hear them talk about free medical. Well, hell, my family and friends and myself with all my ailments, we would love that, but sometimes it doesn't seem that they're focusing on us. Also, I kind of wish these people would tell us why we should vote for them and not focus so much on why we shouldn't vote on the people standing next to them.
Now, O.J. Simpson's politics are difficult to fully pin down. There is a progressive element there when it comes to black rights and police brutality, which I will get more into later, but his many years of financial privilege have tinged his views quite a bit. As an example of this, these were his comments when Biden won the election.
I had an interesting thing happen to me this morning. Before I came into the golf course, I went over and had breakfast on the corner near my home. When I went in, I saw what appeared to be a homeless guy in an entryway next to the restaurant. On the way out, I looked at him, and yeah, he was homeless. He was a little neat. I started my car up, then I walked over and gave him a few bucks and said, "Hey, man, why don't you go get a cup of coffee, maybe a donut or something?" He thanked me. And as I got back in my car, the car next to me was signaling me. I let my window down, and I did. It was a couple from my neighborhood. I didn't know him. I've seen him around. And they said, "OJ, you can't do that." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "No, if you give him money, he's going to hang around, and more of them are going to come." I kind of acknowledged what they said, and I drove off. But driving to the golf course, I was saying to myself, them? Who are them? Them are other Americans. And with a small act of kindness, become a negative. That's why I'm sort of glad that we're going to have this change at the top. I just hope if Biden is the president, and looks like he's going to be, that he remembers what he said about Obamacare, that it was the first step, and that we need to work on it and make it better. Well, I hope he does that with Trump's economics. Trump's economics weren't bad. He did a good job in many areas, and I just hope Biden looks at that and say, hey, there's a lot of good there, and let's just work on it. But more importantly, let's be good to everybody. Let's treat all Americans, no matter what racial or social class they're from, like they're Americans. I'm just saying.
His entire anecdotes about the homeless and then moving to praise Trump's economic policies, which primarily exist out of cutting social security spending where possible, doesn't exactly gel. Not to say that the Democrats are a lot better when it comes to homeless people, seeing as figures like Gavin Newsom and other prominent state and city Dems have no issues with using dehumanizing policies against them. OJ likely doesn't realize this, as Trump's economics were likely quite good on him, seeing as he's pretty wealthy. There's also a decent chance that he's being disingenuous, which I can't comment on one way or the other as I can't read his mind. Now that we're in murky speculative territory anyway, why not look at the other political component of OJ?
Hey, Twitter world, yours truly. This is kind of a sad day, you know? I mean, looking at what's going on in Minnesota, especially, you know, the incident itself angered a lot of people. But I think what you're seeing, the reaction is the fear that nothing's going to be done about it. And that's been the case in the past. That's what led to the riots in LA after the Rodney King case, was the verdict in Simi Valley. When I was growing up, they had the chokehold. You know how many black men died from the chokehold? And how many ended up with post-traumatic stress syndromes, the guys who were lucky enough to live from those chokeholds? What are you going to do about it? You keep saying this has got to stop. The only time it's going to stop is when you start truly holding the perpetrators to account. Start putting them in jail. Hey, Twitter world, it's me, yours truly. Well, today we can't get away from this Derek Chauvin case, and hopefully we'll get a verdict soon. You know, when I first saw it, my first reaction, as I said, is I thought it was a classic case of depraved indifference. I thought it was unnecessary force, and no matter which side you're on, I think everybody would pretty much have to agree that if those deputies and if Chauvin would have gotten off of George Floyd, there was no chance George Floyd was going to get up and try to run. There was no chance that he was going to get up and try to attack them handcuffed. It didn't seem to be his personality.
Now the key question here, was OJ's shift towards Black America a genuine one? At the risk of sounding naive, I do think that there is at least a component of genuineness to his change. Is it largely out of convenience? Probably, as the majority of the minority of Americans who think he's innocent is still black. Meaning that it's easier to ingratiate yourself amongst them compared to his old white worlds. I mean, in all fairness, they're not making it difficult for OJ to take a side on this one. As one of the major voices on the police's side during the BLM protests of 2020 was Mark Fuhrman, the aforementioned John racist.
Mark Fuhrman, on as a guest, talking about this subject. The same Mark Furman who we heard on, I think, 33 occasions say things like all niggas should be put in a hole and burnt if it was up to him. He loved the smell of Rampart Station because it smelled like dead niggas, and just tons of just horrible, horrible stuff. And Fox think this is the guy that should be on TV talking about this subject.
Other than the more serious topics, he also commented on the Will Smith slap.
Hey, look, it was unfortunate. I think Will was wrong. Look, I understood the feeling. Now, in my life, I've been through a lot of crap, and I was raising two young kids, and every comedian in the country had an OJ routine, and don't think I wouldn't want to be slapped a couple of those guys.
Speaking of people he wanted to slap, Jeffrey Toobin, a CNN journalist who wrote plenty of scathing pieces on OJ, who got caught cranking his shit on a Zoom call.
Damn, Jeffrey Toobin. At least Pee Wee Herman was in an X-rated movie theater.
One of the few times he actually directly mentions his own legal past is when he compared his sentence for the Vegas robbery to the sentence of NFL star Henry Ruggs, who committed vehicular manslaughter in 2023 while under the influence.
I know I went to college on a football scholarship, but somehow this math is not adding up to me. You're driving a car at roughly 160 miles an hour on a public street and end up killing a girl and her dog, and you get 3 to 10 years. You go to a hotel room that you're invited to retrieve your own personal stolen property I now have because it was ruled to be mine by the state of California. And you get 9 to 33 years. Same courthouse, same city, same state. I don't know. Somehow it just does not add up to me. I'm just saying.
The sentencing of OJ was pretty controversial, given that it seemed to be some form of retribution for getting away with murder in 1994. If you look at the specifics of the trial, it's pretty obviously the case. The jury was held out until 11 p.m, so the sentencing would happen exactly 13 years to the day of the 1994 sentencing, and he got 33 years as a reflection of the $33 million that he had to pay to the family of Ron Goldman due to a later civil suit. This is obviously pretty awful, regardless of how you feel about OJ. A judge shouldn't base their sentencing on a different case. That's not how a functional legal system is supposed to work. The final Twitter video I want to cover is where he comments on the Alex Murdaugh case. In June 2021, Margaret Murdaugh and her son Paul were found murdered in their house. The prime suspect was the patriarch of the family, Alex, a lawyer who came from a long line of lawyers dating back to his great-grandfather. Other than the fact that the guy killed his wife, spoilers, he got convicted, there's no real similarity between this case and the OJ case. The Murdaugh case is a weird and complicated one that includes fraud, money laundering, and a hitman that was hired by Murdaugh to kill him, so his oldest son would get his life insurance. It's pretty crazy, but it's fairly different compared to what happened to Brown and Goldman.
Hey, Twitter world, it's me, yours truly. Well, a whole lot of people asking me what I think about this Alex Murdaugh trial. I don't know why they think I'm an expert on it. I realized in watching them testify what he was doing. He was just trying to relate to one or two of those jurors that he was a good old boy. He was one of them. And I'm not sure he didn't succeed in doing that. Do I think it's more likely that he did it? Yes. But more likely equals reasonable doubt. But it wouldn't surprise me in the least if this guy beats this case. He's going to go to jail. He's going to go to jail for all the money he stole. I'm curious there because I got 9 to 33 years. 33 years because I caught some guys trying to sell my stolen property and I yelled at them. Even they didn't think I should go to jail, and the judge gave me, just Jackie Glass gave me 9 to 33 years. So I'm trying to see what this guy is going to get. I was up there with guys who had robbed casinos and robbed banks. 2 or 3 times, and they had half the time or a third of the time that I got. So I'm always curious to see what kind of time these guys get for stealing millions of dollars. When I caught guys stealing my stolen property, the state of California, after I was convicted, ruled it was my property and they gave it to me. So I have it now. So how do you go to jail for catching guys who are trying to sell your stolen property? Well, nevertheless, I do think this guy more than likely did it. But once again, more than likely, to me, is tantamount to reasonable doubt. It would work against him in a civil trial, but I don't know if it's going to work against him in this criminal trial. Wouldn't surprise me in the least if he beats this. I'm just saying, take care.
It's interesting to see him go through the process of watching a celebrity murder trial. It shows pretty evidently that he's either completely lacking in self-awareness or a massive hypocrite. Probably a mix of A and B. He criticizes Murdaugh trying to charm the jury, something he did himself. He also can't stop himself from comparing his own robbery verdict, conveniently not mentioning the gun, or the stuff that was stolen that wasn't his originally. His whole comment at the end there about a civil trial also seems to be self-referencing to some extent. Now before we go to the end here, I have a correction to make. In my video about the death of satire, I covered a TikTok that was allegedly by OJ, where he referred to himself as a slayer of women. This TikTok was a fake account that was unfortunately able to bamboozle me to the point that I only realized it was faking after writing an entire page of analysis about it. Looking back on it, it is pretty obvious that it's a joke account, but I think I just wanted it to be real, to the point that I was able to gaslight myself into thinking it was. There's some pretty good stuff in this account.
I'm just saying.
Murderers Who Got Away with It, Part 2. Orenthal, James Simpson.
Don't sleep.
Orenthal James Simpson died on the 10th of April 2024. So what now? There was no deathbed confession, no accountability, no big twists in the narrative. OJ just dies, and that's the end of it. I do think there was something remarkable about OJ's death, and that is in how utterly unremarkable it was. Not unremarkable as in boring, but as in virtually nobody outside of his direct family mourned him. OJ had already been buried in an unmarked grave decades before his actual death. A man who was at one point known as one of the greatest athletes of the modern age will now be reduced to nothing more than a killer who got away with it due to a faulty legal system. In the last years of OJ's life, he spent his time clamoring for attention, having the nerve to speak on current issues like some sort of moral authority, trying to regain some of his lost legacy while trying to bury his acts of horror with his ex-wife. His legacy will be quite the opposite. His own deeds have completely undone the memory of his football years and made it so he will always be known as a murderer, if only he had stayed in Buffalo.